Hello guys, this is your friend Uzumkai Universe 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Jiraiya never held back during Naruto training part 1? There were a handful of fluffy clouds scattered about in the blue sky. The soothing, warm light of the sun caressed the top of Naruto's head. The birds were chirping and, in that moment, he was able to understand Shikamaru's love for cloud watching. It was all perfectly to the blonde Genin's liking. He just couldn't properly enjoy it. Why, you ask? Well, the answer was quite simple. It was due to a certain old pervert with long, white hair. Normally, the Sannin wasn't much of a problem, but his incessant giggling was irritating. The high-pitched noises that erupted from the Sannin were unsettling, to say the least. How was it possible for a grown man to hit such a high note? The young teen did not know. The Uzumaki expressed his annoyance as he sat up into a cross-legged position. Being around Jiraiya was, well, not all that bad. Even when they didn't do anything, Naruto was still glad to be there. He couldn't explain it, it just made him happy to spend time with the perverted hermit. However, when the two of them embarked on their adventure, he was promised training that would prepare him to get Sasuke back, and defend himself from the Akatsuki. The sage was supposed to be teaching him super cool techniques, not creeping on girls at a hot spring all day. Jiraiya's ears twitched in annoyance at the boy's attempt to gain his attention. Not only was it loud, but it threw off his delicate concentration. It's not every day you get to witness beautiful women like this, and he was certainly not going to waste this opportunity. After all, his loyal fans would never forgive him for slacking off on the job. Would you quiet down a little, brat? Jiraiya whispered harshly, glancing back at his blonde pupil. Or are you trying to get the two of us busted? Naruto's ears perked up at his master's choice of words. He frowned and his eyes narrowed dangerously. Us? What do you mean us? He whispered back just as harshly. As dumb as he was, even he knew it would be bad if they alerted the women located just below their high perch. If he had to guess, they were only about 25 feet away from the women. You're here too, aren't you? Jiraiya shot back at his young student. Now if you don't stay quiet, you won't just ruin my research session, but you may also get us caught. Do you want us to get chased off again? Hoping that the conversation was now over, he turned back to his telescope to continue his research. Now, Naruto may not be the most intelligent shinobi in the land of fire, but even he knew what the white-haired Sannin meant when he said research. I mean, Jiraiya has unabashedly referred to himself as a super pervert. It didn't take someone from the Nara clan to figure out what was really going on here. The blonde snorted derisively. If we were caught, who do you think those women would want to beat up the most? The cute, innocent boy, or the old perv holding a telescope that dragged him here? Unbeknownst to them, the longer the conversation wore on, the louder the two of them got. They were so caught up within their own little bubble that they didn't even notice the girls in the hot spring, as they around for the cause of the disturbance. The sage opened his mouth to retort, but quickly closed it once he realized that his student was right. If those girls found them in this problematic setting, he would assuredly get 100% of the beating. However, he was going to keep that little bit of information to himself. The brat didn't need to know just how right he was. Finally thinking of a retort, a smug smirk graced the sage's lips. I believe after explaining my reasoning for being in this compromising position, the ladies over there would jump at the chance to help me get my inspiration. After all, it's not every day that you get to assist an artist in creating their masterpiece. His face got red as drool began to drip from the corner of his mouth, as if a new idea for a scene suddenly popped into his head. Somehow, he believed his own grandiose delusions to be true. These were the moments that truly dumbfounded Naruto. How could a Sannin, one of the revered and universally admired legendary three, act this way? A man whose immense power struck fear into the hearts of countless shinobi was nothing but a big, foolish pervert. And he's my master. I'm doomed, aren't I? Naruto mentally sighed at the realization. Oh, please. Naruto scoffed at the sage's pretentious boasts. We both know that you're just a big pervert who uses research as an excuse to spy on pretty girls. He shouted as he pointed a finger at his master. The boy's patience was wearing thin, It had been a week since they had left the village. That week had gone by, and they still hadn't done any actual training. I left the village to get stronger to go after Sasuke, not to tag along and watch him perv around all day. He thought to himself bitterly. Jiraiya's smirk only continued to grow. Naruto was positive more boasts were on their way. I'll have you know that without my constant inspiration I would never be able to continue my world-famous, make-out, series. He shouted back defensively. Without my books, how would my loyal fans be able to live on? A giant tick mark appeared on Naruto's head. Are you serious? They were shouting now. I bet a 5-year-old would be able to write better books than you. At least their books would have an actual storyline. Naruto smirked. Jiraiya didn't seem to notice what their loud volume was doing, but he certainly did. Things were about to get very interesting. He had no idea how right he was. Now it was the usually composed Jiraiya's turn to get upset. Well, I'm very sorry your tiny brain is incapable of understanding the complexities of my literary masterpieces. The amount of pride radiating from his master made the blonde question whether he should just go home and train by himself. He was starting to think the white-haired Jonin was a lost cause. A compelling tale of lust, passion, and love all wrapped up in one complete package. Jiraiya continued, his smirk ever so present on his face. It's simply perfect. Based on the look of his face, Naruto was no longer paying attention to his bombastic instructor. Jiraiya's passionate speech had been extremely loud, and he had suddenly become very cognizant of where the two of them were. If Naruto knew anything, it was that he needed to get out of there immediately. He peered over the shoulder of the older man, and his fears were unfortunately confirmed. What he saw caused his complexion to go white, and his eyes to light up in fear. A sputtered, unintelligible response came from his lips as he backed away slowly and turned to leave. The sudden change in attitude and body language did not go unnoticed by Jiraiya. Naruto, what's the matter? Are you okay? He asked with actual concern in his voice. Moment, the Sannin remembered where he was and what he had been doing prior to his dispute with his student. Suspiciously crouched just outside of the women's side of the hot spring with a telescope in his hand. The spot also had a perfect vantage point of where the girls had been relaxing, something that the girls were definitely aware of. Jiraiya gulped. Compromising position, indeed, he thought to himself. And now listen, ladies, I know this looks bad, but I can explain. His last-ditch efforts to sputter out a response fell on deaf ears. Despite being in a similar situation more times than he could even count, it was still just as terrifying as ever. These women were clearly kunoichi, he could feel the large amounts of chakra radiating off them. And it was all directed at him. If it weren't for the bloodlust, this would be kinda hot. Even in this precarious situation, he couldn't keep his mind out of the gutter. He closed his eyes and braced himself for the inevitable pain. The screams of the great toad sage echoed through the town. Naruto, who only about 100 feet away from the beatdown, chuckled softly to himself. It had felt like an eternity since he last allowed himself to laugh like that. And knowing that Jiraiya would be okay allowed him to not feel bad for finding humor in his master's misfortune. For a moment, the weight on the genin's shoulders felt manageable. He needed that. Thanks, pervy sage, he thought to himself fondly as he slowly headed back to the hotel. I can't believe you got away. Naruto ran a hand through his spiky hair and sighed softly. I was kinda hoping they would get a few more shots in on you. The boy added with a sheepish grin. He loved teasing his sensei almost as much as he liked eating ramen. Almost. Jiraiya rolled his eyes at the verbal jab by his protege. I'm so sorry to disappoint you. He spat sarcastically, nursing a rather large bump on the back of his head. He reflexively winced away from the pain as he rested a bag of ice on it. Maybe next time I'll grope a couple of them, then they'll really give me a beatdown. Despite that being a joke, the sage blushed slightly at the thought. I doubt it, the genin said dismissively. You seem impervious to serious injury no matter how many times those women kicked the crap out of you. Did pervs have some sort of defensive jutsu that they keep amongst themselves for times of danger? Naruto would have to look into that. When you have been beaten by Tsunade herself, no other beating can even come close. The blonde was fascinated by how his master could feel pride in those words. Tsunade is scarier than all of those women put together, and that's only when she runs out of sake. Jiraiya inwardly cringed at the last time Tsunade ran out of sake when he was around. Naruto remained silent as a thought came to him. Jiraiya's mentioning of the fifth Hokage reminded Naruto of why he was even here with the white-haired sage in the first place. He frowned slightly. While it was always fun to laugh at Jiraiya when he gets caught by women, that's not why they left the village with the intent to be gone for over 2 years. Pervy sage. Naruto's obnoxious voice broke through the peaceful silence that Jiraiya was entranced in. Well, went his attempts to soothe his growing headache. When are we finally going to start my training? It has already been a week since they left the village and the blonde genin was starting to get restless. He needed to get stronger as fast as possible. So many people were counting on him, and he wasn't about to let them down. Jiraiya quietly weighed his options. Ignore him for now, or make up some lie to trick the less intelligent blonde. Pervy sage. Naruto's impatience didn't give the sage that opportunity. Jiraiya clamped his hand over his ears in an attempt to drown out his obnoxious underling, but to no avail. Where's a mute button when you need one? He thought in exasperation. Once I get enough material to complete a few more chapters, we will start your training. I promise, was his plead. He thought for a moment, trying to calculate how much peeping that would take. I'd say another week or 2 should be enough. The Sannin added, in hopes that that would be enough to calm down his student. He didn't think it would, but his optimistic mindset got the better of him. Naruto groaned in annoyance. That was definitely not the answer he was hoping for. Come on, pervy sage. We both know that I can't afford to be wasting time like this. His young mind wandered to his best friend, Sasuke. He ground his teeth together at the thought of him being with that snake Orochimaru. I have promises to keep. I can't just wait around all day wasting time. Jiraiya sighed. He expected that he wouldn't be able to get through to the boy. He was the exact same way when he was younger. Naruto, I understand that you're in a rush, but we've got plenty of time. 2 years is more than enough time to make you into a great shinobi. But why can't we use all the time? The boy asked hopefully. You could just stop your research and help me get as stronger. It shouldn't be that hard to write a book, anyway. Jiraiya went silent. Maybe Naruto had a point after all. With the threat of the Akatsuki looming over the shinobi world, wouldn't it make sense to train the boy as intensely as possible in the amount of time they have? Maybe I've been going about this all wrong. He thought to himself. The sage let out a sigh. The only problem is I need the money that this book will make to fund my spy network. If only I had a bit more time to finish it, then I could focus all of my time on making Naruto into a splendid shinobi. He tried to think of what to do as his mind finally finished processing the last thing his student had said. His mouth twisted into a tiny smirk. I only need a little more time, Naruto. He thought to himself. He needed to play this perfectly. Naruto's natural competitive fire can help him buy a little extra time so he can finish his book. Not that hard to write a book. The well-known author repeated condescendingly. Oh, so you think that you can do a better job than me, brat? He asked with the mischievous smirk still plastered across his face. Naruto's eyes burned with a fire that Jiraiya loved to see. That competitive fury that drives the young boy to new heights. It's that same fire that appeared when Tsunade challenged Naruto to learn the Rasengan in under a week. And, of course, he prevailed. The blonde didn't even hesitate with his answer. No. Jiraiya had to conceal a small frown that desperately wanted to show itself. He was shocked. Wah. I know I can do a better job than you. Naruto finished smugly, cutting off the sage's inward surprise. Jiraiya allowed himself a small chuckle. That's more like it, he thought fondly. Now it was time for his challenge. Something he knew Naruto would never be able to turn down. A challenge was just another opportunity to show everyone how great he was. However, this is something completely out of your comfort zone, kid. Fine, then. How about we make a deal then, Naruto? This was a completely different Jiraiya from the one Naruto was with earlier today. Gone was the goofy pervert getting caught and beaten up by women, this Jiraiya meant business. I'm listening. The genin began, slightly unnerved. He still wasn't totally used to serious mode. Jiraiya. What is it? You said you wanted to train seriously, right? He inwardly chuckled at his own phrasing. That would easily catch Naruto's attention. Naruto's eyes sparkled at the thought of intense training. So much so that he had already forgotten that unnerved feeling serious Jiraiya gave him. Of course. I need to get stronger as fast as possible so I can save everyone. Okay. The sage began slowly. Naruto leaned forward in anticipation as he awaited his master's words. I promise to devote every second we have to train you as hard as possible if, the impatient blonde repeated eagerly. If you write your own novel and are able to get it published through my publisher. The Sannin finished with a large smile. Complete and total silence. Just as Jiraiya was about to break the silence to ask if his student was okay, Naruto voiced his opinions on the sage's challenge. What? The blonde blurted out in shock. He had not expected this. What do you mean? You can't be serious. Now, while Naruto isn't exactly known for his modesty, if his time in the academy taught him anything, it's that he was lacking in pretty much anything that had to do with academics. Writing was certainly one of them. Oh, I'm very serious. Believe it, he said in a mocking tone. Just a minute ago you said you'd be the superior writer between the two of us. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is, kid? Naruto huffed at Jiraiya's mocking of his catchphrase. It didn't sound nearly as cool when it came out of the old man's mouth. Naruto was just about to retort when Jiraiya cut him off. Oh, and before you hastily agree to all of this, there's something else you need to know. The Sannin continued as he ignored the dagger-like stare that his pupil was giving him. What do you mean? He asked in annoyance. There couldn't still be more to this challenge, could there? He was already asking the boy to do something he had never thought of doing. What else could there be? There's one more stipulation to this little bet of ours. Stipulation. He sounded the word out slowly in confusion. His face scrunched up as he contemplated the meaning behind the very large word. What's that mean? He resigned. Jiraiya let out an exasperated sigh. He pinched the bridge of his nose as he debated if he should buy the boy a dictionary. This kid has a long way to go before he can become a competent writer. Never mind, Naruto. He did his best to brush off his pupil's confusion so he could continue. What I'm saying is, you know what you get if you win. What happens when you lose? The smugness in the man's voice did not go unnoticed by the blonde. Naruto scoffed. The phrasing of his master's words irritated. He was always written off before he was even given a chance to show everyone what he was made of. He pushed down any apprehension he had going forward. He was going to do this. No matter what it is, I won't back down. He exclaimed with a re-energized fire in his eyes. There are too many people counting on me to quit now. The boy's determination reminded the Sannin of himself when he was younger. I don't think I've been giving him enough credit. He thought fondly to himself. Maybe he can handle more intense training than I had initially thought. After all, the kid's got guts. Jiraiya admired the guts to never give up more than anything else. Jiraiya stared off into space for what seemed like a few minutes, and it was starting to weird the blonde out. He reached up with his hand and waved it in front of his master's face. Still no response. Pervy sage, he asked with a bit of concern in his voice. The sage blinked a couple of times and snapped out of his daze, only to realize Naruto had closed the already small distance between them and was standing on a chair so their faces were only inches apart. It was safe to say the boy was a little too close for comfort. You okay, perv? Jiraiya's eye twitched slightly as he felt Naruto's breath slam against his face and into his nostrils. What a surprise, smells like ramen. He thought to himself, slightly disgusted. Jiraiya took a few steps back to distance himself from his pupil's ramen breath and cleared his throat. Sorry about that, he began. Naruto noticed that Jiraiya's face shifted back into what he called serious Jiraiya mode. Something told him that he wasn't going to like what the Sannin had to say next. I know how important your friends are to you, Naruto. However, if you lose this bet, as your master I forbid you from trying to go after Sasuke. He was curious to see his student's reaction to this stipulation. Last time they had this conversation, Naruto didn't listen to the wise hermit at all. He was dead set on bringing his friend back to the leaf. Would he continue to ignore the words of his master, or, with the circumstances now different, would he instead honor them? The sage did not know. Meanwhile, Naruto's mind was racing. Had he heard wrong? How could he even ask him something like that? Sasuke was his best friend. He glanced up at the older man's face, and the expression written across it told him that he had heard perfectly clear. What do I do? He asked himself in desperation. If I want to get strong enough to save Sasuke, there's a chance I won't even be allowed to try and save him at all if I fail. Jiraiya felt slightly bad as he watched the inner turmoil his blonde companion was going through. The truth was that no matter the outcome of this bet, the sage has already committed to training Naruto as intensely as he could. He just figured the blonde would give up in a few weeks, and that would give Jiraiya enough time to finish his book. However, with this added wrinkle, it may have just become a lot more complicated. Maybe this will be good for him. Show me how much you've grown, Naruto. He truly did only want what was best for his godchild. This is probably the biggest decision of my life. The blonde was finally able to find his words after a few moments of silence. Despite the almost impossible choice that Jiraiya has given him, he doesn't hold it against his master. After all, given the sage's own history with his former friend Orochimaru, there's probably no one else in the world that understands the Naruto better. So, what will it be, Naruto? Is it a deal? He asked carefully. He awaited his answer with an outstretched fist. Their eyes slowly met, and Jiraiya's eyes widened slightly at what he saw. The piercing stare of Naruto made him feel as if he were swirling back in time. Those blue eyes gleaming with confidence and excitement made him remember his late student of many years ago, Minato. The prospect of a new challenge was too much for the fourth Hokage to pass up, and it seems he passed that on to his only child. The young blonde has yet to even open his mouth, but Jiraiya already knew what his answer was going to be. It was written across the boy's face. "I'll do it," Naruto yelled with all the enthusiasm he could muster. He reached out with his own hand and fist bumped Jiraiya's. Jiraiya smiled and chuckled at his pupil's steely confidence. "Well, of course, you will, brat. It would be no fun if you quit before it even started." Seems like Naruto's enthusiasm was contagious as Jiraiya felt himself get caught up in the moment. "Just you wait. I will win no matter what," the blonde exclaimed as he watched his sensei. Jiraiya dug into one of his bags that were littered around the room. After a moment, he took out a stack of paper and a pen. He came back and handed them to his protege. "If you're so confident, why don't you show me if you have what it takes to be a world-renowned author like me?" he said with a grin. The boy swiftly took the materials and stuck his tongue out at the older man. "I'll show you." He looked down at the blank paper. He blinked, and blinked some more. A sudden realization struck him. He twitched a little as he started to get more and more anxious. Naruto did his best to hide it, but his master could see the sudden change in the genin's demeanor. What could be getting him so worked up? Despite all his boasting and unshakable confidence, Naruto didn't have the slightest clue about what his story would be about. "Me and my big mouth. You know I don't need you to be here, right?" The blonde didn't even try to hide his annoyance as he glanced over in the direction of his master. Jiraiya kept silent and his face remained stoic as if he had not even heard the blonde. He was sitting in a chair with his legs crossed, just watching the boy. It was honestly starting to creep Naruto out a little. He sat there with an analytical gaze, but it was obvious that he enjoyed making his protege uncomfortable. The small smirk that had appeared on his face was proof of that. He shifted slightly in his chair, but his eyes remained fixated on his student. The boy huffed and looked back down at his paper while he tried to ignore his sensei's presence. However, looking down at his paper only reminded him that he had not written a single word in the 3 hours he had been sitting there. "I'm doomed," he thought to himself in despair. "I'm just here in case you need any advice." The Sannin spoke his first words in hours. "I'm an experienced author, after all. My wisdom is invaluable, it would be stupid to not ask me any questions." He finished with a shrug. Naruto scoffed. "Liar. Whenever you train me, you always leave me by myself. He pointed an accusing finger at his master before continuing. Now that you have something to lose, you're suddenly all supportive. I don't buy it. He crossed his arms across his chest and cast an accusing frown at his sensei. Despite looking a little guilty, the sage brushed off the boy's words. The kid was partially right. Jiraiya would love nothing more than to walk his pupil through the steps of his training, but that could be more harmful than helpful to the blonde in the long run. Naruto needs to understand that to become a great ninja, you must be able to figure things out on your own. You can't have your hand held through every step and expect to grow and become stronger. Fine. I can tell when I'm not wanted. The dignified sage stuck his tongue out in a childish manner. He stood up to leave, but before he left he reached into his pocket and placed something on the table beside him. Naruto couldn't help but notice the large grin the Sannin had on his face. "See ya," he said with a wave as he disappeared into a cloud of smoke. Naruto's eyebrow rose in curiosity, but he refused to move from his seat. He didn't trust the grin that he saw one bit. Upon further inspection from afar, the mystery object was revealed to be a book. "It's just a book, anyway," he thought to himself dismissively. That, however, did not sat Naruto's growing curiosity. Whatever book it was, Jiraiya just put it there to mess with the blonde. That much was obvious. Despite this obvious fact, it was doing its job. For whatever reason he felt compelled to see what it was that the Sannin had left him. Naruto glanced back down at his blank paper. He sighed. He recalled Jiraiya's willingness to give him advice, something he was now regretting not asking for. Maybe that's what the book was there for. It's worth a shot. Got nothing to lose, I guess, he said aloud to himself. He stood up to get a better look and his face scrunched up in annoyance. He recognized the cover of the book immediately. Jiraiya had placed his latest Ika book on the table for the boy. That idiot. I knew it was gonna be something that wouldn't help me. He grumbled to himself. Like I would actually read one of his pervy books. He would have ignored the book without a second thought, but there was something else about it that caught his attention. He walked closer to the book to get a better look. I never expected this to be so hard. He dropped his head down on the desk with a thud. Naruto knew he didn't know how to write, but when Jiraiya challenged him, all he could think about was winning. This caused him to accept the bet before he had fully processed it. I don't even have an idea for what my book will be about, either. What was I thinking? He glanced out the window. The dark skies let him know just how late it was. It's already dark out, he asked himself with a yawn. Maybe I'll have some better luck tomorrow. No use in staying up when I haven't gotten anywhere all day. He walked over to the couch and plopped down. He sighed contentedly as he sunk into the soft cushions. The blonde kicked his sandals off and closed his eyes. I wonder where pervy Sage is, he thought to himself as he drifted off into slumber. He fell asleep in what seemed like seconds. Early next morning. I don't think that's how it's supposed to be written. One high-pitched voice said loudly. What do you mean? The same high-pitched voice asked in confusion. How else am I supposed to write this out? The Naruto clones looked at one another and blinked, both of their identical faces scrunched up in complete confusion. Surrounding those two were 8 more Narutos. The 10 Narutos were split up in groups of 2, making a total of 5 groups. One Naruto in each group was responsible for writing down any ideas that they may have, while the other's job was to simply say whatever came to his mind in hopes that it would give them an idea. How am I supposed to know? The other Naruto shot back in slight annoyance. I'm you, I can't know something you don't. Well then why do you think I'm writing it the wrong way? The other blonde retorted in just as much annoyance as his doppelganger. Because, we're dumb, the clone said causally with a small shrug. The vast truth in his words caused the other 9 Narutos to all stop what they were doing and nod their heads in agreement. After nearly 2 hours of trying to use his clones to help him get an idea, the real Naruto had had enough. He stood up and looked at his copies with a frustrated expression on his face. However, there was a silver lining to his frustration. Even though he and his clones made no progress on the story, this did make the blonde realize something. We are dumb, he began with a small smile. We've been trying to rush and get this story finished, but we don't even know how to write. He watched one by one as each clone realized that he was right. The smoke cleared, a single clone remained. He had a confused look on his face as he glanced over at the real blonde. Why am I still here? He asked with his face scrunched up in confusion. Naruto grinned sheepishly. I need you to go into town and get me some books that will help me learn how to write. He explained as he reached into his pocket and threw the clone his frog wallet, Gamma. I figured while you did that I could make some instant ramen for lunch, and by the time I finished you'd just be getting back here. The clone gave his summoner an irritated look, but shrugged his shoulders in agreement. Fine. Just don't expect me to rush back here. It's been a while since I've been able to walk around and get some fresh air. He stuffed the very full frog wallet into his pocket and made his way to the door. Naruto's eye twitched in slight annoyance. My clones are so stubborn. Talking to his master like that, who does he think he is? He's lucky I'm nice. The blonde shook his head away from those thoughts and brought his attention back to the task at hand. He needed to figure out a way to read all the books his clone brought back as quickly as possible while also retaining all the knowledge within them. He said he'd be able to do it in a week, but he was beginning to doubt his own confident claim. I'm only one person, how can I do all of this by myself in such a short amount of time? He thought to himself desperately. If only he knew the answer to his dilemma was out buying his books this very second. The blonde clone happily strolled through the streets of Thankx town. He had been stuck in the hotel room for the entire day and it was refreshing to get out for a little. He stretched out his neck, careful not to drop the plastic bag he had cradled in his arms. It contained a dozen books that will hopefully be the key to helping Naruto write a full-fledged novel. Hopefully these are the kinds of books he had in mind. He thought as he reached into the bag and took out one of the books he bought. The cover read, Writing for Dummies. This is definitely the book for us. He allowed himself a small chuckle at that. He took his eyes off the new book and looked around the bustling marketplace that made Thankx town such an interesting place to explore. Despite the town having suffered the aftermath of the fight between the Sannin a few months back, the townspeople still had smiles on their faces. The marketplace was bustling with customers looking to purchase food, antiques, and other interesting little trinkets. However, many tourists are initially disappointed shortly after arriving when they realize the town's famous castle is no longer standing at its center. Jiraiya has insisted that this be their first stop, much to the genin's confusion. After Naruto's constant pestering, Jiraiya told him that it was because this town had plenty of beautiful women for his research. They would stay in Thankx town for a few months while Jiraiya finished up his book and then they would continue their travels. The blonde smiled as he recalled these memories that technically weren't even his. He knew exactly what the real Naruto was feeling and he took those emotions as his own. Even though the real Naruto wanted to train more than anything, he still enjoyed spending time with Jiraiya. The man may be a hopeless pervert, but the strength and wisdom he possessed was admirable. He was the closest thing to a father the boy had ever had. The blonde clone was ripped from his thoughts as an enticing smell entered his nostrils. His head shot up and was delighted to see that there were several food stands all around him. Each one carrying an assortment of delicious-looking foods. His mouth watered while he rubbed his growling stomach. An evil smile crept onto his face as he patted his pants pocket that contained Gamma. A clone's gotta eat too. Multiple orders of food later and the blonde let out a burp of satisfaction. Man, all of that was so good, he said to himself happily while he bit into a piece of his grilled fish on a stick as he made his way home. Despite his stomach being full of food, this was all that remained of his intense food binge and he was determined to finish what he started. He had to, because once he got back and the real Naruto saw what state his frog wallet was in, well, let's just say this might be the last time this clone ever got to enjoy his day this much. He reached into his bag of books that was now slung over his shoulder and took out the book he was looking at earlier. Wonder how long it'll take him to read all these books, he thought to himself as he took another bite out of the delicious fish. He curiously opened it to the first page and began reading. He continued to walk down the road with his eyes glued to the pages. The clone was slightly surprised by the contents of the book. Naruto disliked reading with a passion, so he wholeheartedly expected to hate every minute of reading it. To the clone's surprise, it wasn't that bad of a read. This is actually kind of interesting. The clone thought to himself. Perhaps the blonde had found an affinity for writing that he wasn't aware of. The doppelganger finished the last of his fish and lazily threw the stick over his shoulder. Before he knew it, he had read the entire first chapter of the book. It appeared to be a basic introduction into the world of grammar and literary devices. Despite it being filled with very basic concepts, a lot of this information was brand new to the blonde. And this is just the beginning. A lot of the other books I bought are way more advanced than this one. It's about time you got back. What took you so long? The loud voice made the clone's head shoot up. His eyes immediately locked with the original Naruto's. He had been so lost in thought that he didn't even realize he was already in front of the hotel. I was about to come looking for you. Thought you might have gotten lost out there. The clone scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry about that, I wanted to make sure I got enough books. He explained as he reached into his pocket and tossed back the wallet to the original blonde. It was technically the truth. The clone casually left out the part where he ate a ton of food. Naruto didn't need to know that part. He caught it and quickly slipped it back into his own pocket. He thought Gamma felt a little lighter than he should be, but he just assumed he was imagining it. So, these are the books? He asked as he took the plastic bag from his clone. Yep, just like you asked, boss. The clone said proudly. Naruto smirked. Great job. I'll start reading these right away. The confidence in his voice covered up what he was really feeling. He was still worried about how long it would take for him to finish all the books. The clone saluted his master and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto was about to head back inside, but something made him stop. A rush of memories flooded his mind. Memories of him eating that were not his own. His eye twitched as he reached back into his pocket and pulled out Gamma. He was scared to open it, fearful of what he might find. He popped it open and his greatest fear was confirmed. Half empty, he said sadly. That bastard. He didn't even bring me back any. Naruto blinked in confusion. Wait, how do I have his memories? He said aloud as if someone would enlighten him, although no one else was around. I wasn't there with him. He concentrated. In the back of his mind there was something else there. He could feel it. Some other memory waiting to be accessed. He shut his eyes tight, hoping that it would help put everything into focus. He reached for it and grabbed the memory. His eyes shot open and he quickly reached into the bag that his clone had brought him. He took out the book on top and flipped it open. He skimmed through the first chapter and to his amazement he recalled everything that was contained in it. What the? His voice trailed off as he tried to piece all this information together. Somehow, he knew of everything his clone did while he was out. He was even able to retain the information within the book that the clone had read. Have I always had this ability when using my clones? He thought to himself. The gears in his brain started to slowly turn. I can just use my clones to help me read all these books. This is great. I won't even need a week to finish all of these. His grip on the bag containing the books tightened. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. He quickly ran inside, a large smile plastered across his face. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Once inside his room he quickly summoned 11 clones. Each clone carrying the same determined look as the original. You guys know what to do. He said, gesturing to the books he had neatly stacked on the table. There's a book for each of us. Grab one, read it, and then when you're done swap books with someone else. The more times we read each one the better chance I'll have of remembering it. This Naruto is very different from the blonde little knucklehead that was in the ninja academy. When he was in the academy just the thought of reading made him feel sick to his stomach. This time around, he felt something else. Sure, the drive and determination he felt when confronted with a challenge was there. He wanted to write this book and shove it in Jiraiya's face more than anything, but that wasn't all. He recalled what his clone felt when he finished reading the first chapter of Writing for Dummies. I might actually enjoy this, he mumbled to himself so lowly that his clones couldn't even hear him. They had already each grabbed a book and started reading. He shrugged. Guess I'll just grab a book then, too. I think I'm finally finished, the aspiring author said as he closed one of the books he bought for what he hoped was the last time. He let out a relieved sigh. Naruto squinted as a bright light shined in his eyes. He placed the book down on the desk and glanced over at the window in the room and was surprised to see that the sun was already up. Did we really study the entire night? He said to himself quietly. The genin yawned loudly as he stretched his tired limbs. He looked over at the sleeping clones that littered the hotel floor and chuckled. Most of them were drooling and a pair of Narutos were even cuddled up against one another. They looked content despite the funny position they were in. He began to reflect on the past couple of days. If I had known about this back in the academy, maybe my grades wouldn't have been so awful. He mused. The method of using his clones to speed up his learning worked better than he could have ever dreamed. He was a little apprehensive at first, fearful that the first time was just a fluke and that it wouldn't work. That feeling of fear quickly subsided after he put his idea to the test the very first time. The amount of information he acquired was more than he learned in the academy 1,000 times over. And that was just a few hours of reading. The past 3 days the pack of blondes had been studying relentlessly. However, this was the longest amount of time they had read in one sitting. Normally, they would study for a few hours before he eventually dispelled the clones. Naruto did this so he could take a break while his mind gathered and processed all the information he and his clones had learned. There isn't any point in waking them up. Naruto stood up and dispelled his jutsu. Clouds of smoke subsequently filled the room as the clones puffed out of existence. The blonde then began to walk over to open the nearest window in hopes that it would help disperse the smoke quicker. He stumbled. Wah! His vision started to get blurry and his balance began to fade. He grabbed his head as a shooting pain suddenly ripped through it. It felt as though his brain had swelled up to the point that his skull could barely contain it anymore. The pressure behind his eyes was so great that it felt like they were about to pop out of their sockets. It was all too much for his young mind to take. He couldn't hold himself up anymore. He started falling, desperately trying to grab at something that would keep him upright. He fell unconscious before he even hit the ground. Thump. N2. It was very faint, but someone was calling his name. He could hear it, but he just couldn't pinpoint the source. The last thing he remembered was that he was about to open the window when suddenly everything went black. Everything was still black. Naruto. The voice boomed again. This time it felt much closer. Jiraiya's apprentice began to stir lightly. The sage could see his student's eyes moving ever so slightly behind his closed eyelids. He let out a big sigh of relief. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm glad I got here when I did. It doesn't seem like he's been out for very long. He noticed that there were quite a few books that littered the floor all around the blonde. He immediately recognized what they were for. Well, seems like he is taking this little wager serious after all. The white-haired sage was certainly impressed. Despite the resolve his pupil had shown earlier, he half expected the kid to get frustrated and quit. However, this did not make his confidence falter. He still believed he was going to win. Pervy, sage, came a groggy voice just beneath him. The genin's eyes were still glazed over, a sign that he was still very much out of it. The aforementioned perv allowed himself a small smile at the sight of his godchild being okay. Well, look who's finally up. Do you have any idea what time it is? No one said you could sleep in, brat. He teased lightly. The boy didn't need to know how worried he really was. That would be much too embarrassing for the sage to admit. The teasing hit its mark. The blonde vigorously shook his head and shot to hit feet. The speed at which he moved slightly surprised Jiraiya. He was expecting it to be a bit longer before the kid was up on his feet again. Who are you to talk, you old perv? He grumbled. Last time I checked you sleep in all of the time. Despite the trueness of those words, he brushed them off. There was something much more pressing that he needed to know about. Yeah, kid. He said dismissively. Tell me, what happened? When I came back you were unconscious on the ground. Is everything okay? The concern as his voice was evident even though he did his best to hide it. Yeah, I'm fine, the boisterous blonde said as he put his hands behind his head in his trademark stance. I just got a little dizzy, that's all. While he may be stretching the truth a bit, he really did feel fine. Because of this, he convinced himself that it was nothing to worry about. He didn't want to make his teacher worried either. The look his sensei gave him, however, let him know that he wasn't buying it. Okay, he resigned with a sigh. The last thing I remember was that I had been studying with my clones the entire night, and when I dispelled them my vision got really blurry, and I guess that was when I passed out. He explained. Hopefully his wise teacher had an explanation for it all, because he was drawing a blank. The older man's eyes widened slightly, but his pupil didn't notice. Reading with your clones. He put his hand on his chin as he contemplated what this could mean. Or, at least, that's what it looked like to Naruto. In reality, Jiraiya already knew exactly what had happened. I guess he figured out what his clones are really capable of. Not bad. How many clones did you make? 11, was the simple response. Naruto. He began slowly. I don't think you should use your clones like that anymore. He was stern. There was no room for debate on this, it seemed. What? Why? This wasn't fair. He figures out an awesome way to use his clone, but he's not allowed to use it anymore. It put too much stress on your brain. That's why you passed out. Your mind can only handle so much at once. You overloaded it. Naruto was going to retort back, but nothing came out. He knew his teacher was right, he just didn't want to admit it. The benefits of using his clones in such a way were very high, but he was fully aware he could damage his mind if he did it continuously. He grumbled lowly to himself. However, Jiraiya's voice caused the blonde to look up from his brooding. I think it'll be okay if you use no more than 5 clones and no longer than 3 hours at a time. He finished with a smile. His student's eyes lit up in joy as he hugged his master out of gratitude. Thank you. Yeah, the Sannin said dismissively. The blonde still wouldn't let go. Get the hell off me, Naruto. After several days of studying his butt off alongside his pack of clones, the spiky-haired genin felt he was finally capable of writing a somewhat coherent piece of literature. His comprehension of spelling, grammar, literary devices, and plot construction was at higher levels than he ever thought possible. While he still had a long way to go before he mastered the craft of writing, he believed that he would continue to get better once he began putting pen to paper. Like being a ninja, you can develop all of the skills you want, but without proper field experience, those skills were meaningless. It had all been surprisingly easy to grasp for him. He was unsure about whether this was simply because of his use of clones to expedite the process, or if he truly had some natural affinity for writing that he was unaware of until now. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the room with his hands resting on his lap. The energetic blonde let out a frustrated sigh while staring intently at the ground. He shifted slightly, leaned back and placed his arms on the ground behind him, propping himself up so he didn't fall backward. While all of this new knowledge was great and all, there was a caveat. There's not much use in knowing how to write if I have no idea what to write about. He thought, slightly dejected. His ability to write had improved exponentially, yes, but knowing how to do something does not mean you have the ability to apply it. Technical abilities are much easier to obtain than natural creativity. Both are necessary tools that an author must possess to make an interesting story. I still don't know what my story is gonna be about. Naruto has begun thinking about possible story ideas almost immediately after he and his clones had finished their study session. Initially, he thought it was a brilliant idea to keep the clones around so they can help him on deciding a topic for his novel. However, that soon proved to be a very bad idea. Naruto was hopeful at first until one of his clones said their story had to be about ramen and only ramen. He was practically insistent on it. To make matters even worse, all of his clones agreed with the stupid idea. Before he knew it, he was having a screaming match with his clones about how ramen could not be a topic for any respectable story. They aren't writing a cookbook. The exchange got a little heated and one of his clones had to be forcibly dispelled with a smack to the head. After that idea went south, it was up to a singular Naruto to come up with the foundation of his story. So far, after several days of trying his best to think of something, the results were not looking too good. He had nothing. Gotta think, he repeated to himself as he rubbed his temples, praying for some sort of inspiration to pop into his head. He glanced over at the book Jiraiya left him that was still resting on the table. He shuddered. Not that kind of inspiration. He thought to himself dryly. As if on cue, Jiraiya walked through the front door. Naruto's head swung around to see who was responsible for the disturbance. When he saw it was just his master, he huffed. What are you doing back already? Finally tired of staring at women for a living? He asked mockingly. Jiraiya looked the blonde dead in the eyes, his round orbs blazing with a nearly unmatchable fierceness that his student had only seen from him a few times. How could you even say that? He deadpanned. His tone was so serious that Naruto had to hold in his laughter. But this was no laughing matter to the white-haired sage. The female body is one of utmost beauty. My eyes will never get tired from seeing their delicate figures swing and bounce around in a hot spring. He trailed off, a slight blush creeping up his cheeks. Naruto's eye twitched. You would think after spending so much time with his teacher he would be used to the ridiculous things that come out of the Sanin's mouth. However, you would be very wrong. The genin is continuously surprised by just how excessively perverted and self-deluded his master can be sometimes. He allowed himself a faint smile at the sage's antics. He's never boring to be around, though. He chuckled to himself. Why are you back already? The blonde repeated his first question, completely ignoring the sage's over-the-top reaction. Well, you see, he began, but then trailed off. He scratched the back of his head and let out a small chuckle. I just wanted to see how my little protege was coming along. Make any progress yet? His hand remained behind his head as he waited for an answer. His sudden interest in the well-being of his student didn't sound very convincing to the blonde. You got caught by a bunch of women again, didn't you? His student asked without an ounce of humor in his voice. He. Jiraiya turned around and revealed that he wasn't actually scratching the back of his head. He was attempting to conceal a rather large bump that he got when a woman, who was much stronger than she appeared, kicked him in the back of the head. How did you know? He asked weakly. When you said you came here for my benefit. Jiraiya's sweat dropped. His student had so little faith in him. Normally you stay out quite a bit later than this, so I figured there had to be a reason you had to come back. Which brought me to the conclusion that you pissed off a bunch of women and had to go into hiding while everything outside cooled down. Well, isn't someone a little sleuth? The older man shot back sarcastically. Jiraiya sat down on the ground roughly 8 feet away from the boy and eyed him curiously. But seriously, how are things coming along? He asked genuinely. Jiraiya seemed more interested in women at times, sure, but that wasn't the case. He cared deeply for the boy, he just has a hard time showing it. Naruto opened his mouth to tell his master that everything was going great and that his book would be completed in no time. But something stopped him. Normally, his bombastic confidence would erupt out of his mouth and alleviate the worries of the people around him. It was a different ball game this time. He was out of his comfort zone and he knew it. Maybe asking Jiraiya for some of that advice he was talking about earlier wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Unless, of course, he pulls out that pervy book again. Actually, can I ask you a question, pervy sage? He asked with much less sassiness than he had during their prior exchange. The change of tone was not lost on Jiraiya and he gave his pupil a questioning glance. What is it, brat? He, too, asked with a much more serious tone than before. The sudden shift in conversation interested the Sanin. Why do you need to spy on women to write those books of yours? When the blonde genin refers to his sensei's books, it's normally an insult or said with a mocking tone. However, this was different. He was genuinely curious. The sage was the self-proclaimed super pervert, after all. The man didn't have a shameful bone in his body. There was no need to make up excuses if he wanted to spy on women. Why call it research if the only intention was to be a perv? Jiraiya looked intently at the boy as he flashed a proud smile. Why? To ensure that my novels become the masterpieces that they are, of course. The ever-present pride he exuded when referring to his works was as strong as ever. Yeah, began the blonde, not taking the easy chance to insult his master once more. But why do you need all of that peeping to write your book? I thought you were a literary genius. Shouldn't you be able to write them without your research? He teased his teacher lightly. Okay, maybe he couldn't resist taking a shot at the older man. God, he loved doing that. Jiraiya continued on, not even seeming to notice that his genin disciple was making fun of him again. Yes, but you should know that almost every successful author implements his own life experiences into their finest works. Not only can it assist them in telling a compelling story, but it also gives that story a very realistic feel to it. Despite the perverted undertone of Jiraiya's words, considering the type of books he writes, his words were very wise. Naruto's eyes lit up. Of course, how could he have been so stupid? It was in front of him the entire time. His mind was spinning in a dozen different directions. He thought about his life, his childhood, how he was treated, all the pain that it caused him. And despite all of that hardship, he still wanted to become Hokage and protect those close to him. These were perfect elements he could incorporate into a cohesive story. A hero. His story would be about a great, strong hero who protects those around him with a power that is difficult for him to control. A potentially dangerous power that causes even those that he saves to be wary of him and treat him as more of a nuisance than the hero he actually is. A hero that continues to protect even those who shun him. Time to get to work. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Suddenly, there were now 7 identical Narutos in the small hotel room. Each of them had an identical determined expression on their face. Well, except for one. Don't you guys think it's kinda dumb that we're basically writing a story about ourselves? Like, how self-centered can we get? I really think that the story about ramen would be a Betty. There was a low thud, followed by a poof. Does anyone else have anything to say? The original blonde-haired genin looked at his clones. There was a dangerous glint in his eyes. The 5 remaining clones shook their heads vigorously. Good. Let's get to work. Okay. It turned out that this time around, using clones would be very beneficial. Even though he and the clones were all the same person, they were useful when he needed to bounce ideas around. His clones did not hold back any criticism when they thought an idea wasn't any good. It was very odd to be repeatedly called an idiot by yourself. The blonde began to contemplate if he was that big of a jerk to his friends. When you're on the exact same page as the people that you are working with, it allows you to be able to work like a well-oiled machine. That became apparent to the child when he saw just how much the group had completed in just a few short hours of work. Some of his clones even went as far as to help him outline the story, develop a setting, and name the main character. His main character's name would be Menma. Naruto's reasoning, you ask? Ramen. The irony of that occurrence eluded him. The genin finally stopped writing and put down his pen as light shined through his hotel window, temporarily blinding him. He was surprised. The fact that his was light out meant he had stayed up the entire night. Maybe we were working for longer than I thought. He thought to himself as he rubbed his eyes. After his vision returned to him, he looked around his room. There were 4 other Narutos littered all across the floor, sleeping soundly. What happened to the 5th, you ask? About midway through the writing session, the aforementioned clone got upset with the original Naruto. He claimed to have a good idea regarding the direction the story should go. However, his idea was shut down. Naruto, being the petty child he can sometimes be, clearly had clones who acted the same way. The disgruntled clone took it upon himself to read some of the book that Jiraiya had left behind. When he was found out, an angry Naruto quickly dispelled the rogue clone. However, that didn't stop the memories of the book to be transferred back to the original. Naruto shuddered as he tried to shake off the images that the book caused to creep into his mind. I'm really starting to think that these clones are more trouble than they're worth. He thought to himself, slightly annoyed. The disciple of the Toad Sage yawned as the exhaustion was finally starting to catch up to him. He gathered what he had completed so far and glanced over it. 3 decently lengthy chapters of a rough draft were what they had completed in just one day. Considering Naruto was aiming for a story with about 10 to 12 chapters, this was a better start than he could have ever hoped for. Words could not describe how much pride he felt at the moment. This was by far the best work he had ever done by himself. When attending the academy, never thought he'd be able to achieve this quality of writing on his own. Hell, at that time he had no interest in being able to learn how to write, at all. All he cared about was becoming Hokage. So much can change in just a few months. He thought to himself fondly. For once, he could look back to something from his past and not feel dejected or sad. He wasn't thinking about Sasuke, or how he was treated for the first 12 years of his life. It was nice. He dispelled his clones and hid his completed work from the prying eyes of his mentor. Can't have that nosy little perv finding out just how much I have done. I wanna see the look on his face when it's all completed. After making sure everything was well hidden, he glanced over at the clock and a groan escaped his lips. It read 8:30 a.m., meaning he would barely be able to get any sleep before Jiraiya came back and forced him to wake up. Despite his busy schedule peeping on girls all day, the sage still somehow found the time to make it his mission to ensure Naruto never slept in. If his pupil wasn't up by 9 a.m., Jiraiya would retrieve the coldest river water he could find and dump it on the unsuspecting blonde. The sage said it was a great way to get his student used to the life of being a full-fledged shinobi. Shinobi had to be alert and ready to wake up at a moment's notice to respond to potential enemies. While that seemed like a reasonable explanation, Naruto didn't buy it. He knew his master just enjoyed annoying him. Otherwise, he wouldn't go out of his way to get borderline ice water. Room temperature water, or even loud noises would do the trick just fine. Naruto glanced back at the clock. Taking into account his 10-minute mental rant, he only had about 20 minutes to get ready for the return of his teacher. 20 minutes passed by quickly, and to no one's surprise, at 8:59 the door to the apartment opened slowly. A head surrounded by spiky white hair poked out from the opening. The lack of noise told the sage that his target was definitely asleep. Perfect. Sharp eyes scanned the room intently, trying to locate the sleeping figure. His eyes settled on a tuft of blonde hair that was sticking out over the back of the couch. You make this too easy, kid. He thought to himself deviously. Jiraiya crept slowly into the room, using every ounce of his renowned stealthy abilities. As he crept closer and closer to the wild-haired boy, he slowly reached into his pocket and took out one of his many storage scrolls. He slowly unraveled it, revealing the kanji for water. This is gonna be good, he mused. The sage sprung forward with great agility and a devilish grin. The intent to ruin the genin's slumber was plastered on the Sanin's face. He blinked. Instead of the goofy little apprentice he was expecting to see, a Naruto lookalike scarecrow was on the couch, covered in a blanket to complete the effect of a sleeping child. Confusion evident in the man's voice. What is this? Bang. Jiraiya immediately regretted that question. His target, Naruto Uzumaki, the Leaf Village's #1 prankster, appeared out of nowhere and smacked the great sage in the back of the head with a comically large frying pan. Naruto laughed hysterically at the way the powerful Leaf Jonin crumpled to the ground. He clutched his sides in an attempt to alleviate the painful cramps his intense laughter was causing him. A large bump could already be seen forming on the back of his mentor's head. The student shouted triumphantly, towering over the master. That's what you get for trying to mess with me, pervy sage. Jiraiya, who was still recovering from the surprise attack, just grumbled something incoherently. Naruto continued to laugh at the expense of his master. His stomach grumbled. All this fun has really given me an appetite. He continued teasingly. I hope we have some ramen. He joyfully made his way to the kitchen, already thinking about the noodle-laden deliciousness that was his favorite food. We don't. Jiraiya, who was partially recovered, was still nursing the back of his head. Why does everyone always hit me in the same spot? He thought to himself humorlessly. Naruto's nose scrunched up in disapproval. Why not? This was simply unacceptable. Because you have to start eating things besides ramen. That stuff is no good for your health, was his wise master's simple response. Naruto frowned. Well, what if I don't want to? The blonde shot back defiantly. Too bad. Jiraiya had to admit he somewhat enjoyed seeing the crushed look on the ramen fanatic's face. Besides, if you ever want to make it past 5 feet tall, you're going to have to eat a wide variety of nutritious foods. It may seem sadistic now, but trust me, you'll thank me later. Naruto shivered. That word. Don't ever say it again. He didn't even wanna think about it. While he certainly wanted to be taller, if he had to give up ramen in the process, it wasn't worth it. The sage facepalmed. Nutritious is not a bad word, brat. He continued as Naruto's face got even more twisted in discomfort at the second utterance of that evil word. I'm not saying you can never eat ramen again, kid. All I mean is that you have to put other things in your body if you want to get taller, faster, and stronger. Okay. The blonde said weakly. He just wanted to change the subject. All this talk about less ramen and more nutritious foods was making him depressed. The sage let out an exaggerated sigh. It wouldn't do him any good to press more. For the time being, he'd leave him alone about his eating habits. So, the sage began innocently. Get any writing done today? He had a curious glint in his eye. Not really. The blonde answered vaguely with a shrug. You were right. Writing is a lot harder than I thought it would be. On the outside, he tried his best to look defeated, but on the inside, he was far from it. He had gotten a lot more work done today than he had ever thought possible, but he couldn't let his master know that. He wanted to hide his progress from the sage and crush his hopes all at once. Jiraiya smirked, completely unaware of his disciple's intentions. Well, one day you're going to realize that I'm always right. He said proudly. Naruto rolled his eyes. Yeah, right. The sarcasm in his voice was audible. Shut up, brat. A couple weeks later. It was dark, cold, and damp. It was relatively silent, except for the periodic sound of drops of water lightly thudding against the ground. Stalactites hung from the ceiling as water slowly ran down to their tips. A lone figure stood in the center of the dark cave. However, there was something odd about this figure. A stalactite hung right above the man, a water droplet was forming at its tip. The surface tension of the rock was doing its best to fight against gravity. The reservoir of water eventually became too big and the water droplet began falling, on a collision course with its target. Only for the drop to pass right through the figure. The figure did not appear to be a solid being. The staticky, ethereal figure seemed to be some form of a hologram. He had spiky hair, and his face was heavily pierced with what appeared to be some sort of odd, black metal. Despite not being physically in the cave, he stood with a commanding authority that could still be felt. A type of authority that exuded power and demanded the respect of all who would stand before him. And most of that power rested in the figure's eyes. The cave was dark, yes, but those eyes appeared to shine as brightly as the sun in that damp, little cavern. They were purple, with deep black circles going around the pupil to form a rippling pattern. He has been standing there for several minutes. He had not made a sound or moved an inch since he had appeared. You're late, he finally said. Oddly enough, he was still alone. As if on cue, a few seconds later, another figure rose slowly from the ground. This being differed vastly from the other. He was solid and had what appeared to be a something similar to a Venus flytrap surrounding his body. Half of his body black, half white. Whatever it was, it did not appear to be human. Sorry. The creature's voice was surprisingly light, almost playful. It did not match his appearance in the slightest. I have a job to do and didn't want to leave early and potentially miss anything important. His demeanor also contrasted heavily with the individual he was talking to. He was playful and goofy, while the other was stoic and intense. I suppose you have a point. The hologram figure said after a short pause. Let us be quick. What is your report, Zetsu? It was clear by the way he spoke that he was the one who was in charge. Well, the one now named Zetsu began slowly, sounding unsure of himself. Will you hurry up and spit it out? A much gruffer, agitated-sounding third voice cut in abruptly. We don't have all day. 3 voices, but only 2 figures stood in the cave. A normal person would have reacted to this abnormality, but the hologram figure did not even twitch. I agree with Black Zetsu. What is your report? He commanded, looking more intently at the left side of Zetsu's face. They seem to be stationary for the time being. And by the looks of it, they do not appear to be moving anytime soon. His goofy tone was replaced with a slightly more serious one as he relayed the findings of his espionage to his leader. Why do you say that? The leader questioned, referring to the latter part of the report. None of their stuff is packed up. If they were planning on leaving soon, they would have begun readying some of their things for travel. Was his simple reply. Interesting. The ethereal figure said after a short pause. I would have thought they'd be constantly moving from place to place to avoid being detected. He closed his eyes for a moment, appearing to give something some thought. Why don't we just move in now? Zetsu's voice caused his leader's rippled eyes to snap open. He eyed him curiously, waiting for him to continue. He is by himself for most of the day and vulnerable, it would be easy. The white half of the creature spoke with such enthusiasm. There's no sign of him? He asked cautiously. No. For several hours out of the day they are separated. You're a fool if you truly believe that. He spoke with a harsh, unforgiving tone. Do not underestimate that man. It will be your undoing. White Zetsu recoiled slightly at those words but did not say anything further. He knew to listen to his leader when he spoke. I do not believe this is the proper time to take action. The pierced man looked down at a puddle of water on the cave floor. When he spoke, the water rippled ever so slightly. Not enough for the average human eye to notice, but his eyes were far from average. His gaze shifted back up to his subordinate. Even if we were able to capture the 9 tails, we would not be able to seal him right away. You know this. And because we cannot allow him to die before then, we run the risk of the Leaf Village attempting to get him back before we have a chance to do anything else. Zetsu nodded, seemingly following his logic. More importantly, as long as he is being protected by him, the 9 tails is untouchable. The intent of his once vague words finally revealed it was obvious who this man was. He was the leader, or at least a very high-ranking member, of the S-class criminal organization, the Akatsuki. And their target, Naruto Uzumaki. He's really that strong, Pain. Zetsu looked as if he was about to say something else, but the eyes of his leader caused him to stop. It was not his turn to speak yet. Yes, the now named Akatsuki leader, Pain, said. However, he began slowly, several possibilities running through his mind. If the opportunity ever presents himself, perhaps there is a chance we could move early. That was all he had to say on the matter. He had some things he needed to think about. Continue your surveillance. Let me know of any significant updates. He turned away, signaling that their meeting had now come to a close. Understood. White and black said in unison. Their bodies slowly lowered back into the ground until they fully disappeared. The hologram of the man named Pain remained stationary in the middle of the cave. His eyes remained shut as he began to think about his past. For a split second, a brief flash of an indiscernible emotion flickered across his face. No, he felt nothing. He was sure of it. Jiraiya-sensei. Huh, how nostalgic. The hologram disappeared, his words echoed in the now empty cave. And the winner is, hey, Naruto, I'm going out to do some research, wanna come? Jiraiya heard aloud. Poof, and shortly after, Naruto walked into the room. He was nursing his cheek with an annoyed look on his face. Why would I want to go out perving with you, pervy sage? He asked harshly. His mentor noticed what looked like a bruise forming on his right cheek. He frowned. What happened to you? He asked with slight confusion. Naruto just grumbled angrily about a clone, calling him ugly. Then after a few punches were thrown, it was every Naruto for themselves. It really makes no sense. His outburst was slightly amusing to the older man. He looks exactly like me. Jiraiya let out a sigh. As much as I'd like to talk with you about your issues, there are beautiful women out there that I need to stare at. He thought about what he just said for a moment. That didn't sound right. Sounds right to me, because that's all you do. Came the young voice of his apprentice. Nah, his master shot back with a childlike tone. I take notes. Naruto had no response to that. All he could do was put his face in his hands and wonder what it would be like to be trained by Orochimaru instead. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. He mused. You know, kid, began Jiraiya, causing the boy to remove himself from his disturbing thoughts and look up at him. You're gonna have to throw in the towel soon on this little bet of ours. His words caused the blonde's face to scrunch up in annoyance. While I really do enjoy watching you lose, we do need to get started on your training pretty soon. It has been a few weeks already and I haven't seen you make any progress on your book, at all. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed. Naruto opened his mouth to retort, but he was swiftly cut off by his mentor. I understand that you really want to go after your friend, but a deal is a deal. I'm still going to train you, of course. I'll just stick to the training regimen I initially had in mind, but Sasuke is now gonna be off limits. Understand? His tone was firm, yet not overly harsh. He had to be careful with how he phrased things. His student had a tendency to let emotions dictate his actions and the things that he says. Naruto waited a short moment to ensure that his teacher had said all that he needed to say. Much to the surprise of the white-haired Jonin, the blonde was very calm and collected. He almost seemed like a different person. Jiraiya knew that he had stacked the deck against his disciple. It almost didn't seem fair and he felt a tad guilty about. However, Naruto needed to prove just how determined he was. He couldn't risk permanently harming his godson like that. He shuddered to think what Kushina would do to him when they met in the afterlife. Had Naruto and his clones not just read a dictionary over the past few weeks, Naruto would have only understood about half of what the Toad Sage had said to him. He nodded slowly, affirming that he understood what his master had said. There was another thing I wanted to ask you. He began, continuing on as if he didn't hear a word the Sannin said to him. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. Now he was positive something weird was going on. Normally, the Naruto he knew would have interrupted him at least 3 times during that speech he just gave. Okay, what is it? He asked suspiciously. He glanced behind himself, making sure there wasn't another frying pan wielding Naruto ready to smack him. How can you say I've run out of time? You still aren't done with the research you have to do for your book. You were supposed to be done with your peeping about a week ago, but you aren't. Jiraiya blushed slightly, embarrassed that he was being called out for his hypocrisy. Well, you see, I've finished the majority of it. He began, trying not to let the opinion his student has of him furtherly worsen. We'll start our training tomorrow, I'll just have to do some research intermittently. Naruto huffed. To him, it just sounded like more training where Jiraiya shows him how to do something once and then leaves the blonde to his own devices while he goes around town and pervs the day away. That was not something he wanted to go through again. Not with the Akatsuki threatening to make their move in just a short couple of years. You can take your half-assed training, and intermittent perv sessions, and stick them up your ass. He crossed his arms across his chest in a defiant manner. I'll have you know that there's no need for you to worry about training me and doing your research at the same time. The sage couldn't help but hear the pride that was welling up in the voice of his student. If he wasn't interested in what was going on before, he sure was now. Oh, and why's that? He asked with genuine intrigue. Naruto opened his mouth to respond but was cut off by a knock at the door. That's odd, the older man said to himself. Wonder who that is. He opened the door and was met with a face he did not expect. What are you doing here? He asked dumbly. 1 week earlier. A handful of Narutos scratched their heads in unison, their gazes resting on a rather large stack of papers. Is that it? One of them asked. Are we done? Another clone spoke with hope evident in his voice. There was a short pause as the blondes looked to one another for confirmation. No. One of the Narutos broke the silence that had fallen over the group and shot up to his feet. Have you read the ending? It blows. He shouted. The angry Naruto grabbed the offending page from the stack and pointed a finger accusingly at the words written on it. The original blonde swiped the page away from his doppelganger, a sneer forming at his lips. What do you mean? What's wrong with it? He asked defensively. It's so unrealistic. Another blurted out. The rest of the group grumbled their agreement, much to the displeasure of the real genin. His eye twitched in annoyance. It would have been bad enough if someone else critiqued his work rudely, but he had to deal with 5 versions of himself telling him that his hard work sucked. What's unrealistic about it? He didn't know whether to be angry or hurt. After all, if his own clones thought this, did he in some way think it too? He glanced at his clones. I've noticed that some of my clones have thoughts that I don't normally have. But how is that possible? They're me. His interest was piqued, but he would have to come back to that thought another time. The guy never gets the girl in the end in real life. A third one blurted out, unaware of the real one's musings. Don't you remember what we learned? It's so cliché. The clone was referring to the books they had read that were so beneficial in developing the blonde's writing abilities. The other Narutos immediately nodded their head in unison at that statement. Their minds drifted to Sakura, their pink-haired crush. They all hung their heads in dejection. Naruto definitely knew that heroic acts don't always get you the girl from experience. Yeah, you're right, they all sighed loudly. Guess we should come up with a new ending. Any ideas? All of the energy that was once present in the group had been sucked dry. The blonde did not like to think about his chances with his pink-haired friend. Actually, it would be more accurate to say his lack of chance with Sakura. He got ripped out of his thoughts as one of his clones tapped him on the shoulder. What about this? The clone asked. He handed the original a few sheets of paper. I actually wrote this earlier while you were so focused on trying to complete your love story. He teased himself lightly. Tell me what you think. Naruto was unsure at first. This clone looked a lot like the one who said the plot should revolve around ramen. Wait, what the hell am I talking about? We're all identical. He frowned at his own stupidity. He began slowly reading over the several pages that were handed to him. The blonde scanned every word thoroughly. His expectations were very high. After all, he technically wrote this material himself. As he continued to read the clone's work, he recalled a segment from one of the books that he had read. While the ending does not mean everything to a story, a well-constructed ending is perhaps an author's most useful tool to convey the message she is trying to tell. In essence, it is the backbone of what the author is writing about. The blonde kept that in the back of his mind while he continued to read. What message did he want to convey? He was unsure. Page by page, every word he read caused his excitement to increase. This was exactly what he was looking for. He was sure of it. This is it. His voice was low, almost a whisper. So low, in fact, that one of the clones asked him to repeat himself. He finished reading. This is it. He was much louder this time, words overflowing with enthusiasm. He looked at the clones with pride in his eyes. I love me. There was a tear forming in one of his eyes. The clone responsible for the work puffed his chest out and allowed himself a grin. We did it, boys. They all cheered loudly in victory. While I would love to celebrate with all of you guys, I have some work to do before the old perv gets home. The clones nodded back in understanding. See ya later, Chief. One of them said as they dispersed into clouds of smoke. Without wasting any time, Naruto darted across the room to where Jiraiya's stuff was. Without regards for his master's privacy, he began swiftly rifling through the old man's personal belongings. Come on. Where is it? He muttered to himself as he continued to look. After looking through everything his master had left behind in the hotel, he still could not find what he was looking for. All I need to know is the publisher's name and address. He continued to speak as if his clones were still there with him. Pervy Sage has to have that information stashed somewhere. What almost felt inevitable, his eyes slowly fell on the book that was resting on the table. The book that Jiraiya had left him had remained there for over a week, untouched. The mere sight of the book made the blonde uncomfortable. He shuddered. Anything but that. It's gotta be somewhere else. The attempted reassurance did little to dissuade the apprehension that was building up inside him. After a few more minutes of fruitless searching, he resigned himself to defeat. The genin slowly reached for the horrifying piece of literature. He took a deep breath, preparing his innocent mind for whatever his eyes may read. He flipped the book open and started scanning the first couple of pages. His face quickly turned a deep shade of red. He had accidentally read a part of the first chapter. Who the hell reads this stuff? His mind shifted to his other teacher, Kakashi. The blonde sighed audibly. He had two insanely powerful mentors, yet both were interested in this kind of material. At that very moment, Naruto did not know if he was lucky or cursed. There it is. After a moment more of searching, he finally found it. Land of Fire Publishing Company. His finger traced along with the words as he read them off the page. The address is here, too. This is great. Once he was done copying down all the information he needed, he put the book right where it belonged. In the garbage. Naruto chuckled to himself. A trashy novel, indeed. If his clones had heard him say that, he would have definitely lost cool points. Present day. Naruto, interest piqued by his master's reaction, glanced over to the doorway. Standing there was a man in some of the most unusual clothing that the blonde had ever seen, and this was coming from a person whose attire consisted of mostly bright orange. The man was dressed in a grayish, almost green uniform along with a hat consisting of the same bland color. He wore dark goggles and had a bag strapped to the side of his body. From what Naruto could see, the satchel contained a few small packages but mostly held what he assumed were letters. That's the weirdest looking mailman I've ever seen, he thought to himself. 59603, at your service, the man said enthusiastically. Naruto glanced up at his hat. Those very numbers were stitched into red cloth right below its bill. I have a package for one, Naruto Uzumaki. The mail carrier seemed completely oblivious to the white-haired man's utter confusion. Who's this guy? Naruto asked suspiciously. The man spoke in an odd, almost robotic, way. Yet, at the same time, he was enthusiastic. This odd behavior perturbed the young child. This is 59603, and he says he has a package for you. Hoping his apprentice would have an answer that would alleviate his current state of confusion. Initially, he was uneasy opening the door, fearing it would be Anbu Black Ops members recruiting him for an emergency mission. Now he was just out of the loop. 59603. Naruto repeated, dumbly, as he took his mail from the strange man. That's not a name. That's just a bunch of numbers. That's right. The number man confirmed. I am a courier ninja. Each courier ninja is designated their own set of numbers as a sort of identification marker. It is an important way to organize our operations. The genin continued to eye the man up and down. So, what are you? Like a postman or something? Not exactly. Normal postmen don't risk their lives on a daily basis. Despite how robotic the man's voice was, he sounded very proud when he spoke about his work. Oh, so you're like an amazing postman. Jiraiya sighed. Sometimes his student's denseness was unprecedented. Just shut up and let the guy deliver the rest of his mail, Naruto. The Sannin thanked the man and closed the door as the courier ninja took off for his next assignment. So, Jiraiya crept over Naruto's shoulder. Whatcha got there? He couldn't quite understand why someone would send Naruto anything, and how that person would know that they would even be here. Naruto allowed himself a small smile. He was so curious about the amazing postman, that it had not even occurred to him what his mail could even be. Once his intrigue had worn off, he began putting the pieces together. There was a very strong chance that the outcome of their bet was located in his hands at that very moment. This was about to get interesting. Nothing you would be interested in, pervy sage. The youth said vaguely. He shifted his shoulder, effectively blocking his teacher from seeing what was written on the package's exterior. The nosy sage was trying to spoil the surprise and his pupil was not having it. In fact, just to get on Jiraiya's nerves, he used his body to completely block the older man's view. This only furthered Jiraiya's welling curiosity. Naruto opened the large manila envelope and quickly read its contents. It was a letter addressed to him from Jiraiya's publishing company. His smirk grew large and larger as he continued reading. Naruto, came the frustrated shout of his nosy master. Let me see. Jiraiya was practically bouncing up and down. How he hated being out of the loop. As a specialist in infiltration and spy tactics, his whole job was to be in the loop. Being out of it was infuriating. Read it and weep, pervy sage. The blonde said as he held out the letter for his teacher to take. Jiraiya quickly snatched it and began to read. He immediately recognized the header that this letter came from. It was the publishing company that published his masterpiece, Ika Ika series. The gears slowly began to turn in his head. This was not good. Why you? He finally sputtered out. He rubbed his eyes and continued reading, hoping that it was just his sight playing tricks on him, but the words on the pages didn't change. He had lost the bet. Naruto, the kid that can barely write his own name, was now going to be a published author. I what? Pervy sage. There was an immense smile plastered on the boy's face. What were you gonna say just now? He asked. While it was certainly fun to rub his victory in the face of his sensei, Naruto felt something that he hasn't felt since he completed the Rasengan and won the necklace from Tsunade. The blonde had put everything he had into proving the sage wrong. He felt as though all of his hard work paid off. But there was a different feeling. It wasn't just about winning, it was about creating something that he was proud of. Something completely his own. Mastering the Rasengan was great, yes, but he wasn't the one who invented the technique. He created Menma and his story, and it was good enough to get recognized by a major publisher. This was a crowning achievement in his life. Jiraiya felt as though something was caught in his throat. "You won," he finally said as his head dropped in defeat. "I can't believe you actually did it," he continued with his head still down. "All without me knowing." "Yeah, I'm awesome." Naruto stuck a finger to his chest proudly as he spoke. "Oh, and I also used your name as a reference, so they would take me seriously." The blonde grinned sheepishly. "But I'm still awesome." Jiraiya sighed. He really did not see this coming. It had taken him over a year to write a piece of literature that was good enough to get published, and yet his pupil had done it in a matter of weeks. It was inconceivable. "I hate my publisher," he thought to himself bitterly. Jiraiya was convinced that it was somehow their fault. "I have to say, Naruto, you exceeded my expectations. I asked a lot of you, and you proved me wrong." While the sage was certainly bitter about losing to his student, he also felt a great amount of pride for the young blonde. "I'm proud of you," he finished with a genuine smile. Naruto blinked. The orphan genin was definitely taken aback by those words. Growing up without parents, or really any parental role models, always left him yearning for the acceptance of the adults around him. To Jiraiya, those words were a simple congratulatory statement, but to Naruto, they meant so much more. For an instant, he could almost feel what it was like to have a father. As inappropriate as his mentor was sometimes, Jiraiya was the closest thing the boy had to a father. And he wouldn't trade him for anyone else in the world. Thanks, was all the boy could muster out. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head and sighed. "Like I was bragging about before, a deal is a deal. Although, instead it's gonna be me on the losing end." He chuckled. "Since it's getting late, we won't start training today. Training will begin first thing in the morning. Make sure you're ready," was all Jiraiya said as he walked towards the door. "Wait a minute," the blonde began. "You're not going to still go out and do research, are you?" he asked, an annoyed tone to his voice. "No," the white-haired Jonin answered simply. "I gave you my word. Had I won, I would have forced you to stop chasing after Sasuke. The least I can do is honor my part, as well. Don't worry, from now on training is going to be our one and only focus." The genin could tell that his words were sincere. "Then where are you going?" He was confused. 99.9% of the time Jiraiya went out it was to conduct research. Did he even do anything else besides eat, sleep, and perv? The blonde did not know the answer, but he would probably put his money on no. "I have to write up the training regimen that we are going to use for you. I was so sure that I was going to win that I didn't actually write anything down." He grinned sheepishly. "Looks like I'm not gonna be able to get much sleep tonight. Couldn't you just write that here?" the boy asked. "Trust me, you don't want me here to keep you up." There was a dangerous glint that appeared in the Sanin's eyes. "Also, I don't want you getting nosy and spoiling the surprises I come up with." Naruto gulped audibly. "You're going to need every second of sleep you can possibly get." Jiraiya may have been incredibly proud of what his student achieved, but he was still a competitive guy. He was upset that he lost. However, he thought it would be a good idea to take all of those negative emotions and throw them on top of his pupil. Naruto would certainly get what he wanted. The boy was about to get the most intense training of his life. Why are you looking at me like that?" a now pale-faced Naruto stuttered out as he backed away slightly. All he got in response was a sadistic grin by his sensei. He didn't like that. Without uttering another word, Jiraiya left the hotel room, his once sadistic smile now just a menacing grin. "This is gonna be fun," he mused. "Well, it'll be fun for me." He let out a laugh that reverberated against the walls of the hotel floor. Naruto, now by himself once again, had a lot of things he needed to process. Most importantly, He was finally going to get the training he deserved. As terrified as Jiraiya made him about the prospect of their upcoming training, he also felt excitement. As he proved when he won the bet between him and the sage, and even his bet with Tsunade, he always rises to challenges put in front of him. This would be no different. Then there was Sasuke. Had he lost, he would have to give up his pursuit to save his best friend from the grasp of that snake Orochimaru. Naruto loved training and getting stronger, but Sasuke was perhaps his biggest motivator for winning the bet. The fact he would be able to keep the promise that he made to Sakura was incredibly relieving. I'll save you, Sasuke. Don't worry one bit, he thought to himself passionately. The blonde glanced over at the clock. It read 6 p.m. As if on cue, his stomach growled. Guess I should eat dinner and then get ready for bed, he said aloud to himself. Based on how his master was talking, the blonde figured he was gonna get woken up much earlier than the 9 a.m. time that Jiraiya usually made him get up at. And if the training was going to be as difficult as the Sannin alluded to, the extra sleep would serve the genin well. Naruto opened the cabinets in the kitchen and frowned. There was no ramen. How could Jiraiya expect him to train all day tomorrow without his premium fuel for dinner? This was already going terribly. After ensuring that the cabinets were empty, his attention turned to the fridge. Inside there was a bento box with a note on it. He tilted his head in curiosity as he picked it up and began to read. I know you're probably upset that you lost the bet. The blonde allowed himself a smirk and kept reading. But it's for the best, I promise. As you probably already know, our training starts tomorrow and you need to eat something more nutritious than ramen if you want to get stronger. Believe it or not, I made this food for you myself. And no, it won't kill you. Enjoy. Jiraiya. His teacher had clearly made the note with the presumption that Naruto had lost the bet. I guess I was supposed to find this after he went out perving. He mused. A thought occurred to him. When did he have time to make food? I haven't left the hotel room in days. The confused blonde looked inside the bento box and to his surprise, the food actually looked edible. Jiraiya didn't come off as someone who knew how to cook, so Naruto was a bit apprehensive at first. It appeared to be steak, peppers, and other vegetables that Naruto didn't recognize. That wasn't surprising considering his fear of the word, nutritious. That was all served over a healthily sized bed of rice. He sat down at the table, picked up the chopsticks and slowly brought a piece of steak to his mouth. He took a bite and was shocked at the flavor he was tasting. This is actually really good, the blonde muttered to himself. The meat was tender and spiced wonderfully with spices that the boy did not recognize. The assorted vegetables were soft, but not too soft, and complemented the texture and flavor of the meat perfectly. No way in hell he cooked this himself, he said as he continued to scarf down the delicious food. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. Hopefully, that food would help give him the strength he needed to survive it. Naruto finished the food and slammed the box back onto the table, his eyes brimming with determination. I'm ready. Naruto had been running for what seemed like hours on end. The air was thick with mist, making visibility very poor for the genin. He took in a long harsh breath, filling his lungs with the oxygen necessary to continue. His heart was beating furiously, legs felt as if they were made of jelly, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Oddly enough, the blonde had no idea why, or where, he was running. Stopping for a moment to calm down a bit, he leaned against a railing that he had been running alongside. Having been in such a hurry, the blonde hadn't even taken in the surrounding area. Over the railing all that could be seen was water. Well, all that was able to be seen because of the sheer thickness of the fog. Am I on a bridge? He mused, unsure of himself. A deep inhale of air left an almost fishy taste in the back of his throat. Wherever he was, he certainly didn't want to stay there for much longer. Energy now somewhat restored, the blonde took off running, once again in the same direction. There was no logical reason why he was running this way, or at all, for that matter. The last thing he could remember was that he was running, so, he figured, wherever he was going was someplace important. Why was it important, you ask? That was not something the blonde could currently answer. The hope was that the answer would show itself soon. All that kept Naruto going was this strange feeling creeping its way up his body. He didn't like it. Not one bit. There was just this sense of impending doom that he couldn't shake. It sent shivers up his spine. He increased his pace, moving at speeds that would make a Jonin proud. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't good. That he knew. The way a small animal scans its line of sight trying to locate a concealed predator. Even though the sage wasn't exactly quiet waking his pupil up, this wasn't the reaction he was expecting. Naruto, he said much softer, putting a reassuring hand on his student's shoulder. It's just me, Jiraiya. Are you okay? He asked, shaking him ever so gently in an attempt to help him regain his focus. It seemed to do just that as Naruto, still breathing heavily, shook his head vigorously to regain his senses. Now with focused eyes, the child realized where he was. He was back in the hotel room that he and Jiraiya were staying at. He blinked, now more confused than terrified. Is everything okay, Naruto? Came the concerned voice of his teacher. Why yeah, the blonde said as he rubbed the side of his head with the palm of his hand. I think I was having a bad dream. Voice laced with uncertainty. He glanced over at his alarm clock. 5:30 a.m., read the evil device. Jiraiya picked up on this. You think? He asked. Naruto yawned as his face scrunched up in deep thought. There were memories floating at the back of his mind. Very recent memories that were just barely out of reach. He tried harder to get a hold of them, but they were just out of his grasp. I don't really remember, he answered after a long pause. Do you remember anything, at all? The sage continued to press, hoping his student would remember anything significant. Water. The sage asked dumbly. What about water? There was water. Okay. The sage said slowly. Do you remember anything else? Water wasn't exactly something Jiraiya would deem relevant. I don't think so. The blonde was now staring off into space. I just told you that was all I remembered, didn't I? Jiraiya watched his disciple stand up and stretch out his arms. Is there anything you want to talk about? The sage didn't know how to approach this situation. Naruto was clearly a little shaken by whatever it is that he saw in his dream, but he was unable to remember anything about it except for the fact that it had something to do with water. How could he possibly help with that little bit of information? It's at moments like this where it becomes evident to Jiraiya that he is not cut out to be a parent. The only reason he tries at all is that he cares for the little blonde so much. Not that he would tell Naruto any of that. What would Minato do in this situation? He thought to himself desperately. Minato had all the makings of being a great father. The Namikaze was wise beyond his years, very patient with everyone he spoke to, reassuring, and had a kind face that made him easily approachable. Jiraiya wished that he had some of those qualities in order to be the father figure that Naruto needed, but he doubted that that would ever happen. I'm not even sure if there is anything that we can really talk about. The blonde said unsurely. How can you talk about something that you can't really remember? Now Jiraiya was the one deep in thought. How could he help his student cheer up a bit? Because of the blonde's lack of memory, trying to talk about it would do little, to no good. So, what else could bring the genin spirits up? How about we take your mind off of all of this by finally starting that training I promised you? He asked hopefully. Any negative feelings that Naruto had were immediately being washed away at the prospect of training. In fact, he was practically bouncing up and down from sheer excitement. How could he have forgotten? He beat Jiraiya in a bet, wrote a book, and was finally about to begin his super awesome training. It felt like an impossible dream that has somehow come true. Let's go, pervy sage. The energetic boy sprang to his feet. Before Jiraiya had even realized what was going on, his student was fully dressed in his orange jumpsuit and halfway out the door. Time's a wasting. Hold it right there, brat. To which the blonde, now sporting a pouty face, stopped in his tracks. Jiraiya shook his head in disbelief. This kid is a roller coaster of emotions, sometimes. I can never say he isn't an easy kid to cheer up, though. Give the brat training or a bowl of ramen and he's the happiest person you'll ever meet. The Jonin smiled lightly. What's the holdup, pervy sage? His bouncing was now from impatience, not excitement. You said we were gonna train today. We have to pack up all of our stuff. Jiraiya said calmly, hoping his student will mimic his demeanor. We aren't coming back here. Unfortunately for Jiraiya, Naruto could not be calmed so easily. Huh, why not? There was a tinge of sadness in his voice. The blonde had grown accustomed to the hotel they were staying. It was cozy. Why did they have to leave already? Shut up and listen to me for once in your life. The sooner we get our stuff packed and this place cleaned up, the sooner we can start your training. Got I. Shadow clone jutsu. Poof. Jiraiya's eye twitched in annoyance at being rudely cut off by his student. At least he's listening to me, kind of. The sage, now trying to ignore the blonde, walked to his side of the room and began to pack up his own stuff. Alright, you guys. You heard the man. I want our stuff packed and this room cleaned up by the end of the hour. The blonde's eyes were blazing with passion. There was nothing more he enjoyed doing than training. That's only 15 minutes. One of the doppelgangers huffed in annoyance. Exactly. Which is why you should be moving instead of complaining. The original shot back harshly. Have left a lasting impression on me that'd be hard to forget. He thought, slightly annoyed at his useless brain. As far as he was concerned, his brain had only two jobs. Let him know when he was hungry, so he could eat, and remember things. Simple, and yet, it still somehow managed to screw it up. This. Jiraiya's voice pulled the boy from his thoughts. The sage was gesturing to the decent-sized clearing they were standing in the middle of. Is where we will be training for the next month or so. The clearing was about 100 feet in diameter, surrounded on all sides by a dense forest. The ground, which had some grass patches here and there, mostly consisted of a firm, packed down dirt. Perfect for the boy to train on. They had found this clearing after several hours of traveling. Based on the position of the sun overhead, it was now roughly noon. The blonde his head to the side in apparent confusion. Why are we not staying here for that long? While Naruto didn't like the idea of trading in his comfy hotel bed for the cold ground, having to pack everything up and travel so frequently might be even worse. He just wanted to train. I thought it would be a good idea to use this time not only to train but to travel the world a bit. It would be a little dull to stay in the same place all of the time. We would have never left the Leaf Village if that was the case. He finished with a light shrug. What we really need to do is try and stay off of the Akatsuki's radar. Staying in one place might cause some unwanted trouble to come our way. I already cut it close by staying in Tanzaku town for too long, can't make that rookie mistake again. Even though they had stayed in Tanzaku town for nearly a month, the sage was confident that the Akatsuki had not found them. In a secluded forest like this, a month should be completely safe. Naruto nodded in reluctant acceptance. He had a feeling there was something that Jiraiya wasn't telling him but decided not to dwell on it. As long as he got to train, it really didn't make that much of a difference where they did it. Training was the only thing that mattered today. Jiraiya inwardly sighed in relief. Thank God he's dumb. Alright, pervy sage. The impatient student chirped. What super awesome jutsu are you going to teach me today? He was rocking side to side in anticipation. While the excitement was certainly there, Jiraiya noted that his protege seemed a little different than usual. The Naruto he knew just a few short months ago would be in his face screaming that they should have started 15 minutes ago. This Naruto was far more reserved than he had expected. The Sannin smiled. Perhaps he's finally starting to take things seriously. Jiraiya was right, in a sense. Despite not realizing it, the whole process of writing a novel had changed the blonde's outlook on how a task should be completed. Had he gone in guns blazing, fully unprepared to write his novel, he would have failed miserably. However, the realization he had about being dumb and not having any writing skills at all was, quite possibly, the best thing that could have happened to him. Slowing things down, teaching himself the necessary tools to succeed, these were the keys to writing his novel. The boy didn't realize it, but he was carrying this methodology over into his training. Well, began the older man, you can start by not calling me, pervy sage, anymore. After all, I am your master and you should be showing me the proper respect. Naruto brought his hand up to his chin and squinted his eyes. I'll think about it, pervy sage. He answered after a short pause. Sigh. Just start with a warm-up. Muttered the older leaf ninja. His eyes scanned over the entirety of the clearing. 50 laps should suffice. It was Naruto's turn to sigh. Fine. We'd better do some actual training next. He grumbled as he started to jog around the circumference of the clearing. Jiraiya, paying no attention to his student's grumblings, walked to the edge of the clearing and sat down against the trunk of a rather large tree. Time to start the fun part, he said to himself as he began reaching into his bag. Slowly, while also watching to make sure Naruto wasn't half-assing his warm-up, the sage took out the necessary materials for the next phase of the boy's training. A set of light ankle and wrist weights, some ink, and a brush. A wicked smile appeared across his face. The kid wants some hard training. Let's hope he doesn't regret those words. With the small brush now dipped in ink, he grabbed one of the 4 weights. Naruto, now on his 4th lap, sighed out of agonizing boredom. Despite really wanting to take his training as seriously as he could, jogging was not what he was expecting, or wanted. Muscles now warmed up to his liking, he scanned the area to find where his master had gone off to. He noticed Jiraiya sitting against a tree at the opposite end of the field. Deciding any time away from pointless running was well spent, he walked over to him. As he got closer, the genin noticed that Jiraiya was scribbling out some weird symbols that he did not recognize. Hey, pervy sage, he called out questioningly. What are you doing? He took a peek at what his sensei was drawing, hoping the closer distance would assist him in figuring out what those odd symbols were. His face scrunched up in confusion. What's with all the weird scribbles? Gesturing to the small weights now adorned with odd swirly patterns. He decided to not even ask about why the sage had such a creepy looking smile on his face. Something told the blonde that whatever it was, he didn't want to know. These aren't scribbles, brat. The older man retorted, slightly annoyed that the blonde did not recognize what he was doing. This is Fuinjutsu, also known as the sealing arts. Sealing, huh, his student repeated in feigned understanding. Whatever it was, it looked kinda cool. Maybe that was something Jiraiya was gonna teach him. His excitement increased. So what are those seals you're drawing for? The sage finished writing the necessary seals on the last weight. He picked up all 4 at once and infused a bit of his chakra into the seals. That way, they would respond to his chakra when he wanted to activate them from a distance. Why don't you put these on and find out? Jiraiya's tone betrayed nothing, but on the inside, he was chuckling mischievously. Naruto nodded dumbly and took the weights from his sensei. Now, with a weight strapped to each limb, Naruto waited patiently for something cool to happen. The way Jiraiya was making Fuinjutsu sound, something cool was bound to happen, right? The blonde frowned. These felt like normal weights. The wrist weights were only a meager 5 pounds, and the ankle weights weren't much heavier. Naruto would venture to guess they weighed, at most, 10 pounds. Pervy sage, what is supposed to happen? Ha! Suddenly, it was as if Choji in his expanded form had just fallen on top of the blonde. Arms now swinging at his sides, it felt as if the ground was a magnet and the weights around his limbs were hunks of metal. He struggled mightily, muscles bulging in an effort to keep the boy's body upright. The initial shock of the massive increase in weight, however, was too much and he could no longer resist. The blonde crumpled to the ground. What the hell are these? He asked, head thrashing about in a vain attempt to help himself back up. Those would be gravity seal. His master said with a humorous tone. With the seals I put on those weights, I can freely manipulate the amount of gravitational force that is exerted on them. I can either choose to make them as light as a feather or heavy as a boulder. In other words, they are the perfect tool to use for your training. Had he not been pinned to the ground with what felt like hundreds of pounds of weight, Naruto would have found that explanation to be rather fascinating. For the time being, though, getting up to a standing position was the current objective. That great and all, he said through grit teeth, still trying in vain to get up. But, don't ya think you should lighten these up a bit? His anger, coupled with the very unthreatening position he was in, caused the Sannin to break out in uproarious laughter. Once calm, he obliged and reduced the gravitational force just enough to where the blonde should be able to stand under his own power. Naruto, now upright, shot his teacher a dirty look that carried the promise of pain the boy knew he couldn't deliver. Whoops, his master said lamely, throwing his hands up in exaggerated surprise. Perhaps I made them a bit too heavy. You think? The younger ninja said through gritted teeth. He tried to lift his arms up so he could strangle the bastard, but to no avail. The weights were still too damn heavy for that. How heavy are these anyway? The blonde said, knees buckling slightly from the stress. Right now the seals are set to about 8 times normal gravitational pull, give or take a few pounds. That means each wrist weight is roughly 40 pounds, and each ankle weight is somewhere around 80 pounds. That's a total of 240 pounds. The sage explained to his blonde student. He noticed the dubious reaction that his student gave and smiled. You're the one who wanted this training, kid. Don't complain now that you have just what you asked for. His disciple grinned sheepishly at being called out. Maybe you could reduce the weight a little bit more? He asked hopefully. Jiraiya shook his head, swiftly dashing the blonde's hopes. Go finish your laps, brat. I finished them already. He lied poorly in response. No, you didn't. How do you know? He attempted to point his finger accusingly at the sage, but his muscles wouldn't let him. You didn't even watch me. Naruto was just simply waved off by his sensei. You've got 46 laps left. He replied smugly. Go finish them. And when you're done, you're going to be doing agility drills and other movements to improve your overall maneuverability. Naruto began to open his mouth to speak but was quickly cut off. Yes, with the weights on. His master said dryly. Naruto grumbled something about a sadistic old man, and began to trudge through his laps. Jiraiya shook his head. I guess the kid needs a little motivation. He thought to himself. Naruto. The aforementioned blonde turned his head towards the sound, a scowl plastered on his face. What? You know your friend? The one with the big eyebrows on Guy's team? Naruto's scowl disappeared, confused by the turn the conversation took. His head now to the side, perplexed. You mean Bushy Brow? What about him? How do you think he got so fast? To which Naruto shrugged. He did something very similar to what I'm making you do. These weights are going to help you greatly increase your speed in a short amount of time. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if the next time you see your friend, you're even faster than he is. Not only that, but these weights are much more compact and won't restrict your movements like the bulky weights Guy uses. There was a tinge of pride in the sage's voice. Using his own ceiling design, he was confident that his method would be even more effective than the one employed by the Leaf Village's Blue Beast. Naruto's eyes lit up. Had he heard the older man correctly? Faster than Bushy Brow, he looked down at the weights strapped to his limbs. Can these really make me that fast? He thought to himself, astonished. His eyes hardened. If that's true, I need to stop complaining and push through the strain. I need to get stronger. There's that gleam in his eye again. The sage mused. That was the same gleam the Sannin saw when he challenged Naruto to write a novel. If the outcome of that was any indication, this is about to get very interesting. Goofy Naruto was fun to be around, sure, but serious Naruto was something to marvel at. The determination the kid carries in his eyes. I don't know if I could ever bring myself to bet against him when he looks like that. He sat back down against the tree and just watched. Are you proud of him, Minato? Kushina? He wondered. Naruto grunted from the effort. Every step he took was a struggle, every swing of the arm to help with his momentum caused his biceps to strain. Only halfway through the 10th lap and his muscles were already begging him to stop. The only things that were keeping him going were the thought of all of his friends, and the desire to get strong enough to where he can protect those friends. This is nothing. He grunted out in between steps. Jiraiya smirked. Every exercise you do will push your mind and your body to the very limit. The sage made sure to speak loud enough that his protege could hear him on the other side of the field. Even the most routine warm-ups are going to be so intense that your muscles are going to beg you to stop. Every time you think you're starting to get used to that weight, I'm going to double it. You're going to want to quit and I won't blame you. He stopped for a moment and allowed his words to sink in. So, I ask you, do you still to continue? He concluded, tone firm but not harsh. Yes, I do. His lips turned up into a smirk at not being referred to as pervy sage. Good. Come on. The 13-year-old said through grit teeth as he took yet another step. He was 49 laps down and still going. The blonde didn't even know how long he had been going for, or how he was still standing. The sun was no longer directly overhead, now at about 45 degrees. It's been at least a couple of hours. Wincing from the strain his body was under as he took another agonizing step. So much for this being a warm-up. He thought to himself bitterly. After nearly 3 hours of dragging himself around with the added weight, he felt his muscles beginning to adjust. That didn't make it any easier on his exhausted muscles, but it was a start. At least there was a somewhat noticeable level of improvement. Ah, he squealed, nearly tripped over his own feet. I'll be the luckiest person alive if I can get out of this training alive. Jiraiya wasn't kidding when he said this wasn't gonna be easy. After just one day of walking, this was one of the most difficult things he had ever done. Apparently, the genin was too deep into his own thoughts. He momentarily lost his, collapsing face first into the dirt. Jiraiya's student tried to push himself up with all of his remaining strength but to no avail. He was just too drained. Damn it. His eyes darted around the clearing, looking for the only man that could help him out of his predicament. Except, no one was there. Really? He exclaimed. Where the hell is that bastard? The blonde swore he was here just a moment ago. He stayed for the first 49 laps, but not the last one. I mean, who does that? The blonde was starting to get angry, head flailing about. When I find him, I'm going to kick his ass. He shouted in hopes that it would somehow reach the ears of his master. He thought for a moment. But first, I'm gonna need to stand. There's gotta be something. Eyes searching for anything to grab onto. A stick, a rock, a tree, anything. Nope. There was nothing even close to being within reach. If only I could move my arms to make some clones. They were only 40 pounds each, but it felt as though a boulder was on top of them. The genin could feel the necessary chakra swirling around within him. It was right there. Without the necessary hand seal, it just had nowhere to be directed. He closed his eyes and concentrated. His goal was to try and force the chakra out of his body. Would that solve his problem? Who knew, but no sense in not trying anything. Come on. The veins in his forehead bulged out from the effort. It's there if only I could just. Poof. Upon hearing the sound, his eyes snapped open in surprise. Looking to the left, then right, his eyes locked with another familiar pair of blue orbs. Standing beside him was, well, him. Could it be a seal-less clone? The clone blinked. He looked down at his hands, face scrunched up in confusion. After patting himself on the chest to confirm his solidity, he frowned. How am I here? He asked dumbly. The real Naruto, however, didn't even register his doppelganger's question. Something much more interesting caught his attention. You have weights on, too. Don't you feel heavy? The clone didn't seem to have any difficulty standing. The clone threw a few mock punches and kicks, bouncing off his heels for added assurance. I guess not, he concluded. That's weird. I guess a clone of a seal doesn't exactly work like the original. Voice laced with uncertainty. Naruto silently thanked whatever deity that decided to bestow this good fortune upon him. Alright, help me up. I need to go find that jerk. Fine. The standing Naruto said, reaching down to pick up his bossy summoner. Damn, you're heavy. You've really let yourself go, you know that. The clone joked with a laugh. The original, whose arm was now slung over the other's shoulder, didn't laugh. You know, if I didn't need you, I would so hit you right now. Despite his good fortune for being able to summon a clone who could actually stand, Naruto was in no mood for jokes, even if they were technically his jokes. You mean if you could hit me you would so hit me right now? His snickering was silenced by a heavy fist. Poof. That'll teach me not to be such an ass. Now, body fully erected, the blonde could reflect on what had just happened. Anger now subsiding, he was overjoyed at what he had just accomplished. I made a clone without a seal. I didn't even know you could do that. The genin didn't know how he had done it, but he was sure of one thing. That was something that definitely needed to be looked into. Now I gotta go find that bastard. He grumbled to himself. Taking another step, He suddenly remembered just how hard it was for him to walk with his tired muscles. He glanced over at a very comfortable looking spot in front of a tall tree. Now I gotta wait for that bastard to come back. Grumbling again as he walked in the direction of the tree.